Chapter 11 of The Money Moon. This recording is in the public domain. The Money Moon, a Romance, by Geoffrey Farnell. Chapter 11 of The Man with the Tiger Mark. It is a moot question as to whether a curl can be more alluring when it glows beneath the fiery kisses of the sun, or shines demurely in the tender radiance of the moon. As Bellew looked at it now, that same small curl that nodded and beckoned to him above Anthea's left ear, he strongly inclined to the latter opinion. "Adam tells me that you are going out, Miss Anthea." "Only as far as Mrs. Dibbin's cottage, just across the meadow." "Adam also informs me that Mrs. Dibbin is a witch."
"People call her so."
"Never in all my days have I seen a genuine old witch, so I'll come with you, if I may?"
"Oh, this is a very gentle old witch, and she is neither humpbacked, nor does she ride a broomstick, so I'm afraid you'll be disappointed, Mr. Bellew."
"Then, at least, I can carry your basket, allow me." And so, in his quiet, masterful fashion, he took the basket from her arm, and walked on beside her, through the orchard.
"What a glorious night it is!"
exclaimed Anthea suddenly, drawing a deep breath of the fragrant air.
"Oh, it is good to be alive! In spite of all the cares and worries, life is very sweet."
After this, they walked on some distance in silence, she gazing wistfully upon the beauties of the familiar world about her, while he watched the curl above her ear until she, becoming aware of it all at once, promptly sent it back into retirement, with a quick, deft little pat of her fingers. "I hope," said Bellew at last, "I do sincerely hope that you tucked up my nephew safe in bed, you see."
"Your nephew, indeed!"
"Our nephew, then. I ask, because he tells me that he can't possibly sleep unless you go to tuck him up, and I can quite believe it."
"Do you know, Mr. Bellew, I'm growing quite jealous of you. He can't move a step without you, and he is forever talking and lauding your numberless virtues."
"But then, I'm only an uncle after all, and if he talks of me to you, he talks of you to me, all day long."
"Oh, does he?"
"And, among other things, he told me that I ought to see you when your hair is down, and all about you."
"Oh!"
exclaimed Anthea. "Indeed, our nephew is much luckier than I, because I never had an aunt of my own to come and tuck me up at night, with her hair hanging all about her, like a beautiful cloak. So, you see, I have no boyish recollections to go upon, but I think I can imagine—"
"And what do you think of the Sergeant?"
Anthea enquired, changing the subject abruptly. "I like him so much that I'm going to take him at his word, and call upon him at the first opportunity."
"Did Aunt Priscilla tell you that he comes marching along regularly every day, at exactly the same hour?"
"Yes, to see how the peaches are getting on," nodded Bellew.
"For such a very brave soldier he is a dreadful coward," said Anthea, smiling. "It has taken him 5 years to screw up enough courage to tell her that she's uncommonly young for her age, and yet, I think it is just that diffidence that makes him so lovable. And he is so simple, and so gentle in spite of all his war medals. When I am moody, and cross, the very sight of him is enough to put me in humour again."
"He has never spoken to Miss Priscilla?"
"Never, though, of course, she knows, and has done from the very first. I asked him once why he had never told her what it was brought him so regularly to look at the peaches, and he said, in his quick, sharp way, 'Miss Anthea, can't be done, mam, a poor battered old soldier, only one arm, no mam.'"
"I wonder if one could find just such another Sergeant outside Arcadia," said Bellew. "I wonder." Now, they were approaching a stile towards which Bellew had directed his eyes, from time to time, as, for that matter, curiously enough, had Anthea, but to him it seemed that it never would be reached, while to her it seemed that it would be reached much too soon. Therefore, she began to rack her mind, trying to remember some gate or any gap in the hedge that should obviate the necessity of climbing it. But, before she could recall any such gate, or gap, they were at the stile, and Bellew, leaping over, had set down the basket, and stretched out his hand to aid her over. But Anthea, tall and lithe, active and vigorous with her outdoor life, and used to such things from her infancy, stood a moment hesitating. To be sure, the stile was rather high, yet she could have vaulted it nearly, if not quite, as easily as Bellew himself, had she been alone. But then, she was not alone. Moreover, be it remembered, this was in Arcadia of a midsummer night. Thus, she hesitated, only a moment, it is true, for, seeing the quizzical look in his eyes that always made her vaguely rebellious, with a quick, light movement, she mounted the stile, and there paused to shake her head in laughing disdain of his outstretched hand. Then, there was the sound of rending cambric, she tripped, and next moment he had caught her in his arms. It was for but a very brief instant that she lay, soft and yielding, in his embrace, yet she was conscious of how strong were the arms that held her so easily, ere they set her down. "I beg your pardon, how awkward I am!" she exclaimed in hot mortification. "No," said Bellew, shaking his head, "it was a nail, you know, a bent and rusty nail, here, under the top bar. Is your dress much torn?" "Oh, that is nothing, thank you." So they went on again, but now they were silent once more, and very naturally, for Anthea was mightily angry, with herself, the stile, Bellew, and everything concerned, while he was thinking of the sudden, warm clasp of her arms, of the alluring fragrance of her hair, and of the shy droop of her lashes as she lay in his embrace. Therefore, as he walked on beside her, saying nothing, within his secret soul he poured benedictions upon the head of that bent and rusty nail. And presently, having turned down a grassy lane, and crossed a small but very noisy brook that chattered impertinences among the stones and chuckled at them slyly from the shadows, they eventually came upon a small, and very lonely, little cottage bowered in roses and honeysuckle, as are all the cottages hereabouts. But now Anthea paused, looking at Bellew with a dubious brow. "I ought to warn you that Mrs. Dibbin is very old, and sometimes a little queer, and sometimes says very surprising things." "Excellent!" nodded Bellew, holding the little gate open for her, "very right and proper conduct in a witch, and I love surprises above all things." But Anthea still hesitated, while Bellew stood with his hand upon the gate, waiting for her to enter. Now he had left his hat behind him, and, as the moon shone down on his bare head, she could not but notice how bright and yellow was his hair, despite the thick black brows below. "I think I would rather you waited outside, if you don't mind, Mr. Bellew." "You mean that I am to be denied the joy of conversing with a real, live, old witch, and having my fortune told?" He sighed. "Well, if such is your will, so be it," said he obediently, and handed her the basket. "I won't keep you waiting very long, and thank you," she smiled, and, hurrying up the narrow path, she tapped at the cottage door. "Come in! Come in!" cried an old, quavering voice, albeit very sharp and piercing. "That be my own soft dove of a maid, my proud, beautiful white lady. Come in, and bring him wi' you. Him as is so big and strong, him as I've expected so long, the tall, golden man from over seas. Bid him come in, Miss Anthea, that Goody Dibbin's old eyes may look at him at last." Hereupon, at a sign from Anthea, Bellew turned in at the gate, and, striding up the path, entered the cottage. Despite the season, a fire burned upon the hearth,
and, crouching